So, of course, it's very easy to just pluck things out of the Bible for cheap laughs, which is, of course, why I did the last 10 minutes. But it's also completely unfair because it completely ignores context. And context is one of the most important things, well, in life, really. And to illustrate the importance of context, I'd just like to tell you a quick story. About 3 years ago, I moved into a house share with a woman named Sarah and her cat. And as you do when you move into a flat share with somebody, you swap numbers, don't you? You know, for toilet paper emergencies and passive aggression. Now I don't know if I didn't press the button correctly or what, but Sarah, my housemate's number, didn't save in my phone. Unfortunately, I wasn't aware of this because 3 weeks previously I'd been on one wildly unsuccessful date with a woman whose name was also Sarah, and her number was in my phone. And it was this Sarah that I then proceeded to text for the next several months, thinking she was my housemate. Here are some of the edited highlights from that period. July 16th. Sarah, the tread on your rear tyres is looking a little bald. Might want to get that checked out. Now, to the intended audience, that's a helpful, if a little patronising text message. To the audience that received it, that's the first couple of seconds of a crime watch reconstruction. I have since apologised to this woman, by the way. A couple of weeks later, I could hear Sarah in the upstairs bedroom having quite a heated phone conversation with her boyfriend, and when it was over, I could hear her, you know, softly kind of sobbing in the upstairs room. And so that she would know I was there for her if she wanted to talk or anything, I just sent a little message that just read, "I'm downstairs." I wish this was made up. About a month later, me and Sarah realised that we had a vermin problem in the flat, but we had an infestation of mice. Now, Sarah is afraid of mice, and I'm afraid of workmen. And it was pretty clear that vagina wasn't going to do anything about it. So we decided it was going to be up to me personally to deal with the mouse problem. So I took the necessary steps, and just so that Sarah would know that everything was in order, I just sent a little text message that just read, "The trap is set." Now, why am I telling you this? Well, it's because I want you to understand the importance of context, because words, when they're taken away from their original sentences, paragraphs, time periods, or in this case, away from their original audiences, do have a habit of changing their meanings entirely. There's even a word for it, it's called contextonomy. And it was as I was explaining contextonomy to the police. That happens. It's as I was explaining contextonomy to the police that I realised this is exactly what people do with the Bible. They just pluck words and phrases out of the Bible to really prove whatever they want. And it's just not really fair. So what context could possibly explain some of the crazy things that are said in the Bible? Well, nothing really, except the Bible itself. Because this is one hell of a complicated book. In fact, even calling it a book is oversimplifying it. Depending on the edition you have, this is between 5 and 70 different books, all of which were written at different times by different people, some of which have been edited hundreds of times over the thousands of years they've been in existence. And the result is something of a mess. I mean, at times this is a song book, a poetry book, a book of sayings, a book of records, a history book. Almost the only thing it never is a guidebook. And in fact, any attempt to treat it as a guidebook is fundamentally flawed, because you cannot follow everything in this book. Not without access to like 1,000 bulls. So anyone that's going to base their life on this has a lot of decisions to make. They have to decide what bits are literal, what bits are allegorical, what bits need to be followed religiously, what bits can be ignored. And when you start to see this, you start to realise that when you consider that every Abrahamic faith is in some way based on the teachings in this book, you start to realise why Abrahamic faith is so complicated. Almost too complicated for me to explain properly in the time I have left. Almost. So please settle in for Matt Thomas's Guide to Abrahamic Faith. And we're just going to be aware of this, okay? Okay, now, as I mentioned before, it all starts with the Bible. Now, the first 5 books of the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, A New Hope, The Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi, are known as the Hebrew Torah. And the Jews decided that that'll do us. Yeah, great, fine. And they founded the religion of Judaism, a religion characterized by, a strong family unit and a deep hatred of yeast. At this point, the angel Gabriel decided that everything was a little bit too simple. So, depending on which historian you read, he decided to travel back in time and explain the goings-on of the Old Testament to the Prophet Muhammad, who wrote them down, and that became the basis of the Quran, which was used as a foundation for the religion of Islam, a religion characterized by charitable giving, daily prayer, and a famous sense of humour about itself. There then follows about 22 books of, filler, before a young amateur magician named Jesus turns up and fucks things up entirely with his own New Testament, which is used, along with everything else, as the basis of a religion of Christianity. A religion so wide-ranging and complicated that it's really difficult to write a satisfactory joke about it. But even that's not enough. These 3 wildly divergent interpretations of a one single mythology are still massively vague and leave huge amounts of room for interpretation. So before long, subsects had to emerge. For instance, in Judaism, you have the Orthodox Jews, who include, but are not limited to, the Hasidim, who are the guys with the curly ringlets and the hats. And you have the conservative Jews, who don't wear hats, but are still pretty Jewy. And then you have Reform Jews, who are basically Christians with hummus. But even that's not enough, because even within these sects, there's still massive room for interpretation. So subsects have to emerge to further interpret the interpretation of essential mythology. But even that's not enough, because each one of these subsects is divided into churches, where a priest, a rabbi, or an imam is employed to further interpret the interpretation of the interpretation of the interpretation of the interpretation of essential mythology. But even then it doesn't end, because each one of these churches is made up of a congregation of people who bring their own prejudices and ideas and life histories to the table, and effectively create a further interpretation of the interpretation of the interpretation of the interpretation of essential mythology. And it's when you realise this that you start to see that there aren't 3 Abrahamic faiths at all. There aren't even 300 million. There are as many Abrahamic faiths, or faiths, as there are people. And but really, all religion is a prison through which to view your own life and maybe make some decisions. Now, you might quite reasonably say, well, if that's the case, then why do we need it? Why can't people just be people? Why do they have to be Christian people, or Jewish people, or Muslim people? And a few years ago, I probably would have agreed with you. Now, the truth is, I was fairly disingenuous at the start of this, when I told you that I don't care about religion. It wasn't exactly a lie, because that's genuinely how I felt when I started this project. But over the course of my research, I've grown to care an awful lot about religion. Not least because while I was working on the show, a very close friend of mine died. Now, and as anyone who's experienced that will know, when somebody close to you dies, you start to think about a lot of things, principally where that person is now. And if it's nowhere, how is that possible? And as I read through these books, I started to think about what a comfort it would be to me if I could really truly believe that there was a plan and that someday I would see my friend again. And that by extension, my own death wouldn't be the end. So I thought about it a lot, and I spoke to some people, I continued reading, and eventually I came to the conclusion that no, I do not personally believe there is a God. But I can't help but feel anything but joy and relief that there are people out there that do have that comfort available to them. Now I say comfort, you might call that a crutch. But really, so what? I mean, we all have crutches. The truth is that none of us know why we're here or what's going to happen when we stop being here. And effectively, every single thing we do is an attempt to escape that fact. You know, we play video games, we get jobs, we get into relationships, we come to comedy shows, sorry by the way, all to escape the fact that one day we will die and we don't have a clue what that means. Religion is just another way of dealing with that, dealing with the crisis of being on the planet. So what am I saying, guys? Am I saying that because religion's a comfort to some people, we should just accept it and put up with all the crazy, wacky and offensive things religious people do? No, I'm not saying that. If you see somebody doing something you disagree with, tell them. But be clear about what you're doing. You're disagreeing with a person, not a religion. All a religion is, when you really get down to it, is a set of ideas. Some good, some bad, some weird. It's a person that has to make decisions. A good person will look through a book like this and find ways to be a better person. A dick will look through this book and find excuses to be a bigger dick. And when you realise that, it's great, because that's how you know. But if you're sending gay teenagers off to deprogramming camps, then you're a dick. If you're forcing family members into marriages against their will, you're a dick. If you're holding up pictures of dead fetuses outside abortion clinics, you're a dick. If you're giving babies herpes through traditional circumcisions, you're a dick. If you're putting up with honor killings in your community, you're a dick. If you're using the Torah as planning permission, you're a dick. If you're actually blowing people up over something that God may or may not have said to Abraham thousands of years ago, then you are a mega dick. Not a Jewish dick, not a Christian dick, not a Muslim dick, just a dick. If you see somebody being a dick, do your best to stop them. But don't ever give them the excuse of religion, because it is the biggest lie in the world. I've been Matt Thomas, thanks very much.